Programs. We have some Concordia alumni in the back to see their own Professor Novak, and we welcome all of you to Books and Coffee. Today's program is a very special program. Usually our program, which is now in its 10th year, is a series of book reviews of current books of current interest and bestsellers. We offer these reviews Wednesday mornings in October and again in the spring. And I received a very nice idea from one of our regulars. Who gave it to me? How many of our regulars, I'm only asking the veterans, would vote for a Wednesday afternoon time slot because that parking is so good in the afternoon? Parking is our number one problem, like it is throughout the village. And how many like Wednesday morning? Aren't you glad I asked? Suffice it to say, we'll see you at... No. Books and Coffee has never been a democracy. Anyway, it is a pleasure to welcome you here. And as you know, we're filmed for UA Columbia cable stations throughout Westchester County, and we're delighted with the larger audience that we're able to bring these book reviews to. Are you ready, Mr. B? All set. Welcome to a very special Books and Coffee review on November 6, 1991 at Concordia College in Bronxville. If you pick up the newspaper almost any day, you'll read tales of daring and dangerous situations. If you pick up the newspaper on certain days, you'll read about a lottery winner. No matter what happens in this world, when something big happens, it never happens to someone you know. I don't know any lottery winners, though I wish I did. And I don't know of anyone personally who has been involved in undercover crime stopping, or undercover crime for that matter. I don't know anyone in the espionage business. I don't know anyone in the greater seats of power or in government. But a couple years ago, the Concordia College family was delightfully surprised at our annual recognition dinner in May of each year, when we gather together and celebrate another year of academic fervor come to a halt for the summer, and when we recognize men and women of the staff and faculty who have distinguished themselves through particular professional opportunities during the year, or who are marking a milestone, anniversaries in their service to Concordia College. Several years ago, we were pleased to hear from a guest to the college, Mr. Kirkpatrick, an author and writer from Hollywood, California, come to honor one of our own. And I was sitting in one of the seats where you are, and I was surrounded by 150 other faculty and staff members and their spouses, and we heard a story that absolutely astounded us. And the next day, all over campus, that was the topic of conversation. That's what Dick Novak's been doing down in the Bahamas. Who'd have thought that we know someone who had this kind of a story attached to him? And for the last couple of years, the story unfolded until finally we've all been reading Turning the Tide, One Man Against the Medellin Cartel. It's a real pleasure, and I don't know really who to introduce first. But without further ado, I'd like you to meet our own hero, Mr. Richard Novak, professor of German at Concordia for 30 plus years, and a friend to many of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Very nice of you. Welcome, and thank you for coming. I don't know many of you here. I'm seeing some of you for the first time. And I'd like to tell you, one of the first questions I'm always asked during a show is, who is Richard Novak? As you know, I've been teaching German here for 39 years. I teach English as a second language. In the past, I've taught everything from oceanography, marine biology, scuba diving, coral reef ecology, and television production. And we were so lucky to get somebody better than I am, and that's Eric Bergman, doing the camera work up there, who does it with us. I'm married and I have 5 children. A few years ago, my family and another family traveled to Key Largo, Florida. We were going to go scuba diving. We got settled in at a place called King's Camp, and one of the first things I did was go down to the docks to see if I could find a dive boat to take us out scuba diving and snorkeling. Interestingly enough, an hour later, I was hired as captain. It shouldn't have come as a surprise. I had been running the ferry boats out of Greenwich, Connecticut, and therefore I was a licensed Coast Guard captain. But I really wasn't ready for that. That was the beginning of my instruction at Key Largo. At that time, there were very few dive establishments and very few dive boats. With time, that changed. I was very excited about the diving around Key Largo, Florida, and therefore during vacations I would travel there and take people out for underwater tours. As time passed, due to reef degradation, due to real estate development, due to canals going through between the Everglades and the open water, the reefs really degenerated. I therefore decided that it was about time to move to the Bahamas and went to Nassau, Bahamas. The island is New Providence, the capital is Nassau. Of course, the first thing a diver is going to do is go diving, so I went down to the main diving area in downtown Nassau and went out to a place called Rose Island. And it wasn't much better than what I was seeing in Key Largo, Florida. I decided that that's all the diving I'm going to do. However, the next day, I rented a moped and drove to the other side of the island to a place called Lyford Key. And I said, well, this is a place that I'd like to spend the rest of my life. Of course, I wanted to retire at an early age. I went snorkeling there and then went up to a hotel right nearby, and I said, do you have a room for me overnight? And they said, you're the only person at this hotel. The hotel was the South Ocean Beach Hotel. Some of you may know it. And so I said, look, I have a deal you shouldn't refuse. Number one, let me open up an underwater activities program here, and I'll bring in the divers I had been training for years and years and years. And they said, you have a deal. A short time after that, I took my boat from Key Largo, Florida, across to Nassau, stopped close to evening time off the beach at South Ocean Beach Hotel, and decided I would walk up and register. And I took what I had, put my clothes up about here, stepped off the boat, thought I was in 3 feet of water. I was in about 8 feet of water. So I walked up to register, and there I was with water dripping down making a big pool on the floor there. That was the start of my diving experience at South Ocean Beach Hotel. What does a diver do when he wants to relax? He goes diving someplace else. And so one day I said, I'd like to see what else is around here. And so I just took a map of the Bahamas and put my finger on it, and it went to a place called Norman's Cay. Many of you have read the book already, so you know how infamous Norman's Cay turned out to be. I didn't know it at the time. I went over to dive there, as you know from the beginning of the book, that I tried to get Bahamas Air to take me there, and I never did figure out, at least for a long time I didn't figure out why they wouldn't take me there. At any rate, I hitchhiked, and that takes me to the beginning of the book. It takes you to the beginning of the book too. At this time, I'd like to welcome Sidney Kirkpatrick. I'm happy that he's been able to come here from California. I think he's one of America's great authors. And I welcome
him. Great authors is, I'm sure, an overstatement. An author. I figured you'd put up with Richard Novak for some 36 years here. You could put up with Sidney Kirkpatrick for 10 minutes. So it couldn't be that bad. Just by way of an introduction, I come from a family of writers. Truly a family of writers. My father, who's the only non-writer in 3 generations, considers it far too many writers because he had to support many of us. I have a younger sister who's a senior editor at Macmillan. I have an older sister who's a writer for National Geographic. My mother wrote her first book when I was 1 year old. My grandfather started McGraw-Hill Publishing Company. So, you know, there was never any question what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. And as opposed to many struggling writers, there wasn't really any trouble finding an agent, finding a publisher. The search for me is finding subjects. The search for all of us is. And Richard is certainly a magnificent subject to write about. And I went ahead and did that. I suppose with Turning the Tide, there's a great deal to talk about. One thing I won't talk about is diving. My diving career lasted approximately 25 minutes. Richard had me on the island of Normans, went through the correct operation of snorkel equipment, lured me out off the beach, where till I was about up to my waist in water, and I saw the largest fish I think I had ever seen outside of a fish store, and I made a beeline back to the beach, and I swore I would just never go back into the water, and I stuck to it. And so you know, as you read the book, there are diving instances. They're not mine. They're all Richard's. But with a book like Turning the Tide, there are a lot of different things one can talk about. One can talk about the writing process, which is relatively boring. You know, the publishing process. Instead, I'd like to relate an incident which I haven't talked about before. I've sort of been keeping it in. It's not reflected in the book at all. It's a very personal incident. It's rather embarrassing in some ways, but I think it reveals very much what it's like to write nonfiction crime stories, which is what I do for a living. Stories that I don't turn into books. I make into movies. I sell to movies. I sell to television. I sell to anybody who will buy them. That's how I earn my living. I keep 15, 20 true crime stories going simultaneously. I'm researching them. Things that I don't end up using, I sell to television. Television is the last place to sell it because they'll buy anything. My publishers, on the other hand, anyway, the incident takes place in 1988, 1989. Carlos Lederer, who's infamous drug lord, whom I write about in Turning the Tide, has been captured in Colombia, extradited to the United States, and is standing trial. At this point, I haven't really started writing my book. I've done a great deal of research. I went to the island twice, once with my dad. Once we were turned away at gunpoint. I found Richard Novak at Concordia. I made a deal with Richard to do a book and/or a movie, whichever came first. We didn't have an ending. Carlos Lederer, his nemesis, hadn't been arrested. Well, eventually, you know, to cut to the chase, he was arrested. There was a trial. I was the first standing on line in Jacksonville, Florida, to meet Carlos Lederer, to sit in on the trial. And I don't know how many of you have been to trials, but they can be very boring, even very high-profile trials. This was anything but that. It was a mob scene in Jacksonville. Helicopters overhead, snipers, DEA agents, sheriffs, police, everybody. I mean, it was a literal mob scene. To walk in, you had to go through bomb-sniffing dogs, go through metal detectors, and the press were there in droves, hundreds of press. And I hate seeing press, because press is a competition to me. The more a story is written about, the more reporters are there asking questions, the harder it is for what I do, because what I do takes years. What a journalist does, he can telephone over the wire to Associated Press and it'll be in the paper tomorrow morning. So it's a real competition. One of the first things that I recognized when I got into the courtroom was that there was nobody to interview. The Drug Enforcement Agency, the prosecutors, had taken anyone who knew anything and secreted them away. So the press, NBC, CBS, were running around. They were literally interviewing cab drivers. They were just desperately hunting for somebody to interview. And something that's very peculiar to this story is that very few people involved in it wanted to say anything. Everybody had something to hide. I'm sure Richard had something to hide too. Never found out, but you know. Anyway, day in and day out I was attending the trial, and it was interesting to me, but very early on I noticed a young girl, 22, 23 years old, was sitting in the back of the courtroom the entire time. Came in every morning at the exact same time, sat through the entire day's trial, left at night, came back the next morning, always dressed the same, wore the exact same clothes. Blue blouse, a skirt, always sat with a pad, but really wasn't writing in it. I wasn't quite sure why she had brought it, but I recognized her. While the press were searching around for somebody to interview, there was a girl sitting in the back of this courtroom who had perhaps more to say about this story than anyone, including those being prosecuted. This girl, who was 22 years old, was lovers with Carlos Lederer, the defendant, and the common law wife of defendant serving with him. She's a scared little girl. I knew a lot about her. I think I probably knew more about her than anyone in that courtroom outside of her husband and her lovers. I knew about her from Richard. I knew about her from a lot of people I interviewed. I had seen pictures of her. I had a real inside track. I knew who she was. None of these reporters had any slightest idea who she was. Let me just give you a little background about her. I don't know what her childhood was like, but it certainly couldn't have been very good. She ran away at 14 with a man named Jack Reed from Las Vegas, Nevada. Her mother and father tracked her down to San Pedro, California. 4 months later, they arrested Jack Reed for statutory rape. He was put away for 2 years. She was sent to reform school. They got out at approximately the same time. She vanished 2 years later. I mean, she vanished right out of reform school. At the same time, he vanished from parole. They met together on the same island that Richard was talking about. They had obviously planned it out. So she was, 15, 16 years old on this island. She led a very Bonnie and Clyde kind of existence. She was, the man she chose to be her lover was Carlos Lederer's chief pilot. He flew a Learjet. He flew a Learjet full of drugs. He flew many Learjets full of drugs. By the time she was 18, she was perhaps worth $6-7 million herself, not to mention Jack Reed. She loved him. As the situation on Norman's got crazy, and I think anyone who reads the book will see how crazy it got. It got insane. She had a real rough time. She and Jack Reed fled the Bahamas. They couldn't go back to Colombia because they were afraid that Carlos Lederer would hunt them there. They made a deal with Manuel Noriega, and they fled to a little hamlet in Panama where they were arrested. They were extradited from Panama at the same time Carlos Lederer showed up at the trial. She was not prosecuted, but her husband was. Well, so anyway, I knew who she was, and I knew that of any people who were to appear at this trial, she was perhaps the most valuable. So I think any writer in my position is faced with a very delicate job, because I wanted to get her story. I wanted to know what she had, and clearly she wasn't going to respond to me if I told her who I was, so I just started sitting next to her every morning at trial. I sort of laughed when she laughed. I took an interest. I warmed up to her. I followed her at lunchtime. I sat across the cafeteria from her at the courthouse. I did my best to be there all the time. I stood at the bus stop with her until she started knowing who I was. One day, I remember it very clearly, a man was testifying, and she turned to me and she said, first words she ever said, first words I heard come out of her mouth was, "This is not it. This is not it at all. This is not what happened." And I said, "I know." And I let on that I sympathized with her. I did, in certain respects, sympathize with her. But I was a spy. I really wanted to know what she knew. And I worked my way into her confidence. I started sharing lunches with her. I told her that I had come down, a half-truth. I had come down to hear a particular witness whom I was close to. Turned out to be a witness for the prosecution. I didn't let that on. But I wormed my way into her confidence, and very gradually she started opening up, and she started telling me things that I never would have gotten in a formal interview, and that I doubt she has ever told other people. She was in a very, she was desperate. She was stuck in Jacksonville without any money, with the man she loved on trial, all alone. I followed her one day. She was living in the garage of her lawyer. It was very sad. In any event, she told me a lot of things about the island that I hadn't known before, and she as the drug war was going on, as bullets were flying, I heard a story from her, a side of the story that I never got from Richard, and for quite, for very good reasons. She was an insider. She told me the gentler, loving side of Carlos later, if there is one. She told me about her dog, Norman, whom she loved, whom they would fly, 300 or 400 miles into Miami to take to a vet's. In any event, she literally held up a window for me, of what was going on that island. And outside of the ethical, the issue of am I, as a nonfiction writer, remiss in not telling her who I was, outside of that, what's important is that here I was, as a writer, I'm seeing a window, and her story was as truthful, it was as honest as Richard Novak's story, and they're very different stories. Just as the book, Turning the Tide, is my story, it's a truth, it's not Richard Novak's story. It's about Richard Novak, certainly. It's about Carlos later. It's about young Michelle Brown, who at 14 was taken away from probably a terrible home situation with a boyfriend. It's about a lot of people. But I think the first thing writers have got to keep in mind, the first step towards taking a serious step towards writing, just as a serious step towards becoming a reader, is realizing whose eyes you're seeing things through, being very aware of how this information you're getting is being filtered. And if you don't like it, don't blame yourself. Don't let it's the writer. Be very aware. Don't let a writer pull the wool over your eyes. Be very smart readers. I don't know. I'll be more than happy to answer questions, honestly. But that's essentially what I have to say. I know Richard's got a hell of a lot to say, as he has, but...
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
We have to stay within a time frame. We should be out of here by 25 after because the choir is going to rehearse. And so therefore I limited Sydney's time. In front of you, you see 4 students whom I have asked to read the book and comment. And before I take questions from anybody else, I would like to introduce them and let them make their comments or questions, depending, and then Sydney and I will be happy to take your questions because that's one of the reasons we're here today. I keep on getting pretty much the same questions over and over and over again. And the reason I chose 3:30 was I was hoping that most of the staff, most of the faculty, most of the students, and most of our community would have been able to be here with us. So that's the reason for the afternoon one. Who would like to begin? Jennifer? How do you like that for a volunteering? Okay, Jennifer, would you?
My name is Jennifer Harris, and I'm a student.
Excuse me.
Concordia.
Why don't you come up to the mic, Jennifer? I'm going to ask each of you to follow the same pattern Jennifer started. That is, give your name, state your question, and either Sydney or I will repeat the question if necessary. We have mics, so I'm not going to repeat your question, but for the others, yes.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Harris, and I'm a social work major here at Concordia. My name's Jennifer Harris, and I'm a student at Concordia. I'm a social work major. And I don't really have a question as much as I have a comment about the book. I really enjoyed the story. It was an exciting story, but as a reader, I didn't feel drawn into it. I felt somewhat detached from the story, and I was left hanging because my question was, what was Professor Novak's feelings about the whole situation? I didn't feel that his feelings were expressed enough. He was the hero of the story, and I didn't feel that his emotions were brought out in the story enough to really fulfill what I was looking for as a hero. In that respect, I was detached from the story. I wasn't drawn into it like a real action, that action film you see all the time. I wasn't right there with it. So my question to Dr. Novak would be, what kind of inner struggles did you go through while this whole thing was going on? What kinds of inner struggles, conflicting values, beliefs, ideals, and relationships, what kind of things were going on in your mind during this whole affair?
Thanks for the easy question. This whole book really started from a bunch of diaries. One of the students here said to me yesterday, I finished the book and it sounded like you were writing a diary. I didn't write the book. I wrote a lot about what happened in small diaries. For example, on usually during July, the 1st of July, I would get to Norman's Key. I would be on vacation from Concordia. And I knew that drugs moved July 4th, December 25th, Boxing Day, which we don't celebrate, but Christmas certainly, and any time the drug cartel suspected that both Bahamian and American officials would not be attentive. I was fortunate enough to have studied in Germany and taught in Germany. These people never knew that I was a German professor, and that was in my favor because when I started suspecting things were going wrong on Norman's Key, that is, night flights which are prohibited, cars lined up on the airstrip showing their lights so that the airplanes could land, and then meeting Carlos later. Sydney has made me promise not to say anything negative about the book. We went through that before almost every show, and including today at lunch. But I do have to say that there are certain things that happened that are a little bit different than, not Sydney wrote, but the editor did. And my feelings now are a little bit different from what happened before, because I had in 1978 the first indication that these two German bodyguards who spoke, they were from Stuttgart, which means they had a dialect. Luckily, I had been in Stuttgart and was able to understand that drug smuggling was going on. And it's at that point that I went to the American Embassy. First, I went to the Bahamian police and told them what was going on. And of course, the Bahamian police were being paid off by the Colombian smugglers. I then finally ended up going to the American Embassy. This is over a period of a couple of years. If I had not been on Norman's Key, I think that I would find it difficult to know what Norman's Key really looks like. You have to be there to see how beautiful this place is, and then you might understand why I wanted to spend my life there, retire, and set up an underwater activities laboratory. But now the conflict has begun. I've gotten no help from DEA, FBI, CIA, or even BVD, whatever you wanted to call all those names, especially Bahamian police. You have to realize that because of the evidence I presented to both the DEA and Bahamian police, 149 Royal Bahamas police were removed from the force down there. On the one hand, I felt a little bit sorry for the policemen. They made very little money, and the pictures I showed to the American Embassy, DEA, and to the Royal Bahamas police involved Bahamian police rolling Colombian airplanes into a hangar, helping unload the stuff into smaller airplanes or into boats, and then having it removed. This book, chronologically, I find it difficult. I don't know if anybody else felt that way. I may say what somebody else wants to say. I'm sorry if I do. But I would find it difficult to understand the time frame of the book that the editor chose. You have to remember, I'm making a difference between editor and author. In my opinion, what I said before, Sidney is one of the great authors. And I'm not the first person to say that. Any of you who watched Good Morning America knows Digby Deal said it before I said it. He's the, what is he, Sidney? He's the book commentator?
Yeah, he's a former editor of the Los Angeles Book Review and columnist for Playboy.
You can look on page 34 of Playboy, but don't look at the pictures, please. He said some very nice things about it. I had conflicting emotions. Was it worth doing it? Was it worth my life? Is it worth getting stabbed? Is it worth being beaten? When you find that most everyone around you is working against you. Your question is a real fair one. It wasn't until quite a while later, this is over a period of years, that I started getting cooperation from American government officials. I never did get the cooperation from the Bahamian police. There was a hearing held, and I think that's where Sidney first got the idea where I was or what I was doing.
Yeah.
Complete confidence, all secret. Nobody's going to know, Novak, that you're at the... This was held actually in Miami. I didn't want to go back to the Bahamas because I thought it was injurious to my health. And so therefore, the hearing people came over, and all of a sudden this was published in a manual. And that's how some of the news got out. For years, probably the only person who knew what was going on was our president, Ralph Schultz, because he would get a call saying, we need Novak, drugs are suspected, it's suspected that drugs are going to move on a given date. And I'm giving a long answer to a question. Incidentally, Dr. Schultz is away at a teachers' convention, or he would be here. He's been a very firm supporter all this time. Did I answer your question? I'll give you another chance. Okay. Sean?
My name is Sean Burke. I'm a sophomore here at Concordia. I was not quite sure what to expect when Professor Novak first asked me to read the book. We read a lot of literature here at Concordia, and a lot of it is very deeply philosophical, a lot of symbolism, etc. And that was not quite what I was expecting with this book. I was expecting an action-adventure story. I was expecting a hero story. I was expecting suspense, and all of these things I did get in Turning the Tide. As I finished each chapter, I found myself fighting to have to put down the book, knowing there were other things I had to do. Each chapter left me saying, but what's next? But what's next? And I kept wanting to turn the page and keep going. I would have read the book in one night if I could have sat down and done that. So in that case, I did find the action-adventure story I was looking for. But I also wanted to point out that I found some other things in the book. I found some deeper things in the book, which I was very surprised and very excited to find. There were a lot of moral and religious undertones and undercurrents in the book, which I greatly appreciated and enjoyed. And there was another thing that I found which today struck me very much, and that's the great appreciation and value put on the environment by Professor Novak, by Mr. Kirkpatrick, that comes out in the book. Great respect for the environment, a great respect for taking care of it. And those undertones, in addition to the hero story itself, made the book very worthwhile reading, and I commend Mr. Kirkpatrick in writing the book that way. And I also, again, applaud Professor Novak. To find out that we have a hero like that in our midst was very exciting.
I'd like to introduce Joy Kyrie, one of my favorite German students.
I'm Joy Becker. I am a sophomore here at Concordia, and I am a combination English and secondary education major. And when I read this book, I would have to say that I felt in a lot of ways the same as Jen did. I felt detached, but it was for a different reason. Maybe I shouldn't know Professor Novak when I read this. I think that kind of, it hindered my reading, I think, because I read it and the person I read about in the book, it was just so different than the one I see in German class every day, and that was really hard. It was really, it was like two totally separate people, and that was really hard for me to get into it from that standpoint. But I did really enjoy, like Sean said, when you get to the end of a chapter, you want to go on, and again, like he said, you get so used to reading so many deep books when you're in college, and it was just really nice to sit down and be able to read one that was a suspense kind of book and just be able to go right through it and just really enjoy it. So that, I guess that's all I have to say. I can really see it doing really well as a movie, because I think it has a lot of really widely public interest, and I think it would do really well that way.
Speaking of the movie, Sydney may want to say more about it. We were hoping that the person who's doing the screenplay would be here. Is he here today?
I don't think so.
He was supposed to represent the
Are you here?
Anybody here? Is Peter Abrahams here? Okay. Claudio, a former ESL student of mine, right? German? Right. Okay. Claudio has, after he finished with me, did an astounding paper on drugs. And before I talk much, I'm going to ask Claudio to talk. See, he looked at his watch. Okay, Claudio.
Well, as Mr. Novak mentioned, I had a little background with him, because about 3 years ago I was writing a paper, and I was doing some research. I ran into his name in an article from the London Times. I was like, what is he doing here? So I went back to him and said, what is this? And I asked him to explain, to tell me a little bit about the story. That's when he mentioned the book. He said, well, this book is going to be coming. I've been waiting for the book for 3 years. So when it finally came out, came to me and said, thank you, finally. I started thinking that you're kidding me. And he'll talk about it, I would just laugh, yeah, right. Another one of those Novak stories, And so it took me 3 years. It took me 3 years till finally came out. Now I believe him. And I sat down and read the book in 2 days, because didn't have enough time. But was sort of what I expected. It really was. I didn't expect any less of an exciting story, of an exciting adventure, which Mr. Novak is always involved with. But on the other hand, probably from the historical background, because I'm I'm a senior at Concordia. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a senior at Concordia. I'm a history major. And I've done a lot of studies in international drug trafficking. And I was looking more for the international aspect. I was looking for the, talk about Medellin cartel. And I was expecting, to have all this information about that. That's the only part that I wasn't really, that kind of wasn't my expectation. But then I quickly found out that the story was about Richard Novak and how is it that he helped the DEA and CIA and FBI. And I found that very exciting. I still think that if we had a little more insight in the Medellin cartel itself and what was Carlos Leder's connection with Colombia. I mean, Colombia is mentioned, he is mentioned, but I don't think he's put in perspective as how big of a fish Carlos Leder really was. And I think that if that was a better explained, we could, understand better how important this story really is. And I've seen Carlos Leder, his name in, maybe I'm mispronouncing, but I've seen his name in other articles, and he's a big fish. And I'm glad he's not at large anymore. And I still, hopefully. But I think that there's people like Novak that come out and speak out and witness against people like that maybe we're going to get something done. I also have one question. That's the question that bothers me throughout the whole book. Why the hell did you go back there?
I went back because some of my heroes are Martin Luther, a man at the right time, the right place. Immanuel Kant, who said, have courage to do what you think you ought to do and don't worry about what other people say about it. And of course, Goethe. I went back because nobody else seemed to be doing anything. And Claudio made a very important point, namely that one of the questions I'm most frequently asked is, what can we do about it? And I'd like to simplify that by saying, oh, education is the answer. I don't know how much we're going to get in trouble for this, but it's part of the answer. But until our government, and I'm talking about CIA, DEA, and FBI, are ready to stop playing games through people like Oliver North, Admiral Poindexter, and other higher people, you fill in the missing name, then we're going to do something about it. Claudio made the point, the cartel is what we should be going after. We don't have to worry about say no to drugs. Anybody who's on cocaine already knows how bad it is for them, and yet they're still using it, and they're using it more than they did before. My answers, I feel that we ought to get the government to stop doing what they're doing. Number two, go after the top people in the cartel, the Carlos Leders. The one thing that a person in the cartel fears, like Carlos Leder, is spending life plus 145 years and no chance of parole in an American prison. Not the Pablo Escobars who volunteered to go to their hotel to be fed by their mother. This is not what is going to stop drugs. I talk a lot. I'm sorry. Okay. You guys did a real good job. You want me to field questions or do you?
Let's both do it.
Okay.
We'll both be up here.
I request that you give your name and we'll repeat your question. First question?
Probably no question. I'll let you field out.
Yeah.
We'll let the loudmouth.
It's not everything, but the people in charge are having a problem, in my opinion. My answer to that question is like all my stories, long. But I would suggest one thing. There's a book out. It's not very easy reading. It's called Cocaine Politics. Has anybody read it? Cocaine Politics. That will give you the answer as to who is doing what with whom. All right, I won't take a lot of time. But that book will indicate some of the things that I think we ought to know.
think I have an answer to that question.
Okay.
My name is Ben Herman from the Bronx. A little word called permissiveness. In all phases of crime, the permissiveness gets to a point where you actually get away with murder. Now, when some ideas of cocaine, they are actually killing people. So why can't we kill them? Life imprisonment, they're in prison, they still conduct their business while in prison. So the idea is we need stricter penalties to get them off the street for good, not temporarily.
I'd try to repeat the question, but I can't remember all the parts of it. I think the point is that why don't we just kill, is it drug pushers as well?
The dealers.
Drug dealers?
Murder.
If I could have a chance to answer that. I had a chance to kill Carlos later a number of times. But to see him sitting in a Jacksonville courtroom with manacles on his ankles and handcuffs and knowing or hoping, I didn't know at the time he was going to get the sentence he did, I feel a lot better that he's alive. Yeah. Well, see, there's another part to that answer, too. There always is a long answer. The thing is that if you would have asked me a month ago, would I do it all again, I would have answered yes. When I found out recently that a deal may be cut between Carlos Lader and our American government, then I don't know at this point.
This is what he's leaving out is the government's looking for people to testify against Manuel Noriega. And they've asked Carlos Lader if he wants to cut a deal and testify. And he said, sure, but what's in it for me? And here's the man that the U.S. government has spent some $9 million plus putting behind bars, you know, may live to get out of jail, whom was sentenced to life plus 154 years.
So do away with 154.
Okay. Next question, please.
I love the book, the style, everything about it. I am sorry going home tonight I won't be able to pick it up and read it. I finished it, but I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you.
It's good style.
Thanks.
As he said, as Professor Novak said, a great writer, very simple and to the point. And I think Professor Novak is one of our heroes.
Good.
Can I respond? We have to stop in 2 minutes, but I'd like to respond to that. Sidney did a very good job in outlining the objective of what I did. It was not to become a hero at all. It was what I described before. Number one, education. Yes, start with that. I'm not going to live long enough if we start educating the 7th and 8th graders for them to get out in society and make the difference. But the point of the book was not to become a hero. In fact, one of our editors made me out to be a Rambo character. She was...
Well, just wait till the movie comes.
Okay. One more question is all we can take. I see Kevin coming down with a hook. Okay.
My question is addressed to the young lady who's the English major. Can you conceivably see that this book would ever be part of a college required reading program?
Jennifer wants to answer. Joy, would you like to answer?
I don't think so, but I'll go ahead.
I don't think so at all, because, I mean, just in terms of the way, the way the book came out, not that it was written this way, but I don't feel that it was, the structure of the book was, it seems like I have all negative things to say. I really don't. I felt the sentences very choppy. I mean, a lot of the sentences were Novak did this, and I felt that it really didn't use active verbs, and it was just very stilted in that way. And I really did enjoy the book. And just
I respond with, I have a lot of negative things to say, but I won't say them today. We'll talk about it after. We're going to have to stop now. Kevin is moving us out. Sydney and I will go outside. We'll be happy to talk with any of you, try to answer questions. I want to thank our guests for being here. As we thank you people. Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. We've heard the word hero used so often, and as I said in my introduction, we never meet the heroes. We never know one. Well, we really do. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you in the spring.